Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jonna Dara Ernst with Heartland Community College, and today we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of modularizing, and we're specifically going to talk about some of the required forms and processes. And I'm so happy to have Lisa Slevar, who is the Associate Director of Academic Scheduling and Pathways from Heartland, here with me today. So Lisa, could you talk a little bit about your role at Heartland?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am basically the academic scheduler and course catalog keeper at Heartland Community College. I submit all of our submissions to the state, keep our courses active, and make sure our programs are approved and working in good order.
And Lisa and I have worked extensively over the years on our modularization processes, which, as we've discussed in other videos, has required a lot of unthinking, but certainly the processes are there to support a lot of the creativity that we've been able to accomplish. So one of the first things I wanted to talk with you about, Lisa, is forms needed to create or modify an existing syllabi. And so, as is discussed in other presentations, there's occasionally the need to either create a new syllabi when modularizing, or there's impact to existing syllabi. And so if you could please just talk a little bit about course forms required, and then we could spend a little bit of time talking about what kinds of changes require submission to ICCB.
Sure, absolutely. So ICCB has course forms titled Form 11, which is basically for any new course that you're submitting. And there's also a Form 12, which is used for any changed course or withdrawn course. These are physical paper forms right now, but your college liaison to ICCB will actually submit this information through the ISIS system in ICCB. They may need you to just complete the form so that they know what information to submit.
Great, thank you. And what kinds of syllabi? I mean, we have that great list there, but what kinds of changes require submission of a Form 11 or Form 12?
Sure. Well, any new course would require a submission. Any change to a course that would modify your master file with ICCB, that includes changes to title, course prefix or number, any change to credit or contact hours or components of those contact hours if you're making a lecture or a lab course different. Also, if you're going to begin to allow repeats for the course, or if you're going to offer it for variable credit in different semesters, you would need to request approval for that. Or basically any change to PCS or SIP code, if you're changing the course from a transfer to a CTE or vice versa, those would all need to be submitted.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot and that we're going to emphasize later is that changes required in terms of submission to ICCB are not always the changes that you need to submit to your curriculum and academic standards committee or whatever that happens to be called at your institution. And so while you may be required to submit changes to syllabi to your curriculum and academic standards committee, not all of those changes require submission to ICCB. And again, that's a point that we will emphasize later. This is an example of a Form 12. Lisa, is there anything that you would like to highlight on here?
I think really this is the nuts and bolts of what you have to submit if you change something with the course. Anything that is listed on this form is something that you would need to notify ICCB of. So this is a really good thing to use as your guide as you're moving through modularizing your courses.
Great, thank you. And I agree, it's a great synopsis and it's so nice to have the visual image for that. Lisa, can you talk a little bit about what form is needed to change a certificate or degree?
Sure. For any existing programs that you need to modify or withdraw, you would do a Form 22. For that type of form, again, it's similar to the course form. This is the program information, and it affects anything that is on your ICCB master. So again, you would need to submit anything, changes to the title of the program, changes to the curriculum prefix or number, those are usually internal, changes to the minimum credit hours needed for the program, or if you're going to withdraw it, you would need to submit the Form 22 to your college's liaison to submit to ICCB.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that overview of the conditions that that form is utilized within. And here again, we have an overview, or we have the actual screenshot of a Form 22. Is there anything you'd like to highlight on this form?
I think just, again, use this as a guide. If you're changing anything about your program that you would find on this form, then you need to submit it to ICCB.
Thank you. So in some cases, there's the need to create a new certificate or degree. And when we went through the initial process of modularizing our courses, we weren't creating new certificates or degrees. However, that might not always be the case. So we were operating within the existing structure of our Gateways credentials, as well as our AAS degree. And so could you please talk about, under the conditions that you might need to create a new certificate or degree, the forms required for that?
Sure. If you are wanting to grant a certificate or degree through your college, and you want to be able to report that up to the state and higher to the federal government as completions, then it needs to be on file as an ICCB approved degree or certificate. For most of the programs you would be creating new, you would be basing them off of a AAS program that you already have on file. And you would do that through the reasonable and moderate extension process, which is the ICCB Form 21. And that requires, basically, it's an application package that you would have to submit to get that new program on the books for your ICCB master.
Great, thank you. Very helpful information. Here's an example of the application for a reasonable and moderate extension. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight on this form?
Just that this form is basically the overview of all the information that you have to submit. And so it's usually a 2 to 5 page document. Once all of the information is submitted, you have to, basically prove that there's labor market need for it, how it aligns to your other programs. You have to give them a copy of what the curriculum is going to look like, talk about any accreditation issues. So just basically rationalizing the need for that program.
Great, thank you. And I'll just mention that data is something that we have extensively at the state level, connected to each of the Gateways credentials. And so we have robust data, not only at the state level, as well as at the community level, that supports Gateways credentials. So in terms of helpful information, just a few things to highlight. First of all, related to reasonable and moderate extensions. Lisa, in terms of emphasis.
I think I would just remind that if you are going to create a new program, you need to start first at that R&M extension process, just to make sure that you're touching on everything that is required at the state to be able to get that through.
Thank you. And another point, and again, we mentioned this earlier in the presentation, the idea that our Curriculum and Academic Standards Committee requirements and Illinois Community College Board requirements differ. And to give a really concrete example of that, we are in the process at Heartland of modularizing our infant and toddler credentials. That has necessitated some changes to syllabi. While these are not changes that are required to go to the Illinois Community College Board, they are changes that are required to go to our Curriculum and Academic Standards Committee. What kinds of changes are required to go to each individual Curriculum and Academic Standards Committee, although somewhat parallel around the state, may be unique to your own institution. So being sure that you are in touch with those requirements, timelines, et cetera, is incredibly important. Lisa, is there anything in there that you'd like to emphasize?
Just to reiterate that your curriculum committee standards will be much higher. The types of things that you need to submit to your curriculum committee standards are larger than what you would submit to ICCB. So
Thank you. And then finally, timelines and expectations. One of the things that we mentioned is learning the requirements and expectations for your curriculum and academic standards committee, or whatever that committee, parallel committee, is called at your own institution, and understanding Illinois Community College Board timelines and expectations for submission. Lisa, can you talk a little bit about each of those requirements? And I know that some of that information is obviously Heartland specific.
Sure. Well, at Heartland, our curriculum and academic standards committee timelines very much align with our schedule building and enrollment timelines. So we always try to be out ahead of when the schedule will go live so that we're showing students what they're actually going to be looking at when they enroll. ICCB timelines are somewhat different. If you're submitting changes to a course or a program, they can take up to 30 days to approve that change. It's typically not that long, but you need to kind of plan for that. If you're planning for a new program, you need to just kind of look at the application path you're going to try to figure out the timeline, but it could be 3 to 4 months depending on the approval cycle needed through ICCB. So just keep in mind as you're working towards a future implementation for a program that there's a couple of months difference in being able to get the approval and file.
And again, I recognize that this is Heartland specific, but there have been times in the past, for example, when we were interested in running a pilot and all those timelines weren't necessarily lining up. And when I'm saying all those timelines, I'm speaking to internal Heartland timelines, timeline to get things in the catalog and on the schedule published in alignment with that. And so I'm thinking very specifically of a pilot we ran a few years ago, and we were still able to meet emerging needs. Can you talk a little bit about how those kind of emerging needs can sometimes intersect with the very pressing requirements of keeping timelines, et cetera?
We our timelines I feel like are always shifting, just because we always have, there's always special circumstances that we need to consider when we're creating these. So with some of the things that you were doing with your pilot, we just had to kind of brainstorm ways that we could make those work within our current system. And we just had to get some people together and just use what we had and kind of retrofit it, basically. In most of those cases, we didn't have to wait too long for ICCB approval on anything, so we weren't running into that issue. But internally at your college, you may have different processes on when you would post something to the catalog if it had not been approved yet, that kind of thing. So again, it would just be checking in with your college to see what their timelines are and making sure that you're fitting in with those.
And the potential of exploring if there are opportunities for creative processes that are still respectful and responsive to ICCB requirements, as well as the needs of learners, et cetera.
Yeah, those often don't go hand in hand, because the stuff that you are submitting to ICCB is really minimal. It really doesn't speak to the processes that you have to develop in your college to make those work. So those sometimes have to kind of be being discussed at the same time. So you're not wasting time once the approval has come through. You're not then trying to scramble to figure out how you're going to make it work.
Thank you so much for your time, Lisa. And we will have links to the forms and an FAQ that highlight additional points that Lisa has emphasized today. So thank you.